I'm standing in the marble bathroom of a $47 million penthouse, staring at my reflection in a gold-framed mirror, and there's $2.3 million in cash sitting in a leather briefcase on the counter beside me. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely turn on the faucet. In exactly 4 minutes, I have to walk back into that living room and give Caroline Whitmore my answer, and whatever I choose will destroy someone's life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a broke graduate student from São Paulo ended up holding the financial future of one of America's wealthiest families in her trembling hands. 6 months earlier, I was surviving on instant noodles and the kind of crushing anxiety that comes from watching your bank account hover at $83 while your rent is $200. I'd moved to New York 3 years prior with a full scholarship to Columbia for my master's in art history, convinced I was going to curate exhibitions at the Met someday. Reality had other plans. The scholarship covered tuition, but living in Manhattan on $600 a month? I was drowning. I'd taken every side job I could find. Dog walking, tutoring entitled teenagers who couldn't care less about Renaissance art, cleaning apartments in buildings I'd never be able to afford. But it wasn't enough. I was 2 months behind on rent, and my landlord, a man who wore the same stained undershirt every day and smelled like old cigarettes, had started leaving notes under my door. Final notice written in red marker. That's when I saw the posting on a private job board one of my wealthier classmates had told me about. Discreet personal assistant needed, art history background required, flexible hours, competitive compensation. The contact was just an email address. No company name, no details. I almost didn't apply because it screamed sketchy, but desperation has a way of lowering your standards. 3 days later, I got a response. Not an email, a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Miss Cardoso? The voice was female, crisp, British accent. Mrs. Whitmore would like to meet with you tomorrow at 2 p.m. I'll send a car to your address. Wait, I don't understand. What's the job exactly? All will be explained at the interview. The car will arrive at 1:30. Please dress appropriately. She hung up before I could ask what appropriately meant. The car that picked me up the next day wasn't a car. It was a Mercedes S-Class with leather seats that probably cost more than my yearly scholarship. The driver didn't speak to me, just held open the door and drove in silence through Manhattan until we pulled up to a building on Fifth Avenue overlooking Central Park. The kind of building with a doorman who wore white gloves. The elevator required a key to access the penthouse floor. When the doors opened directly into the apartment, because of course it did, I stepped into a space that belonged in Architectural Digest. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the park, original artwork on the walls that I recognized from auction catalogs, a Monet sketch, a small Picasso ceramic. Furniture that was somehow both minimalist and obviously cost a fortune. Miss Cardoso. I turned to find a woman in her late 60s standing in the doorway to what looked like a library. She was slim, elegant in that effortless way that comes from generations of wealth. Pearl earrings, Chanel suit, hair in a perfect silver bob. But it was her eyes that struck me. Sharp and assessing, like she could calculate your net worth and your deepest insecurity in a single glance. Mrs. Whitmore? Please sit. She gestured to a cream-colored sofa that I was terrified to touch with my H&M dress. I sat. She didn't. I'll be direct, Miss Cardoso. I need someone with your specific background for a particular project. You studied Renaissance art at Columbia, correct? Your thesis was on the authentication of disputed attributions in Caravaggio's late period. I blinked. Yes, but how did you... I make it my business to know things. She moved to a bar cart and poured herself what looked like whiskey. Didn't offer me any. My late husband was a collector. Contemporary art mostly, but he had eclectic tastes. Since his passing 8 months ago, I've been sorting through his acquisitions. Some are documented, many are not. She turned to face me, and something in her expression made my stomach tighten. Some were acquired through, shall we say, unconventional channels. I need someone who can authenticate pieces, provide proper documentation and provenance, and above all, be discreet. The compensation is $15,000 per month, cash, plus a $50,000 signing bonus. I couldn't breathe. That was more money than I'd seen in my entire life. What's the catch? For the first time, she smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. The catch, Miss Cardoso, is that you will see things in this apartment that may be complicated, art that may have unclear origins, documents that may raise questions, and you will keep absolutely everything you see confidential. No photographs, no notes that leave this apartment, no discussions with anyone. I will require you to sign an NDA with penalty clauses that would bankrupt you for life if violated. Every instinct I had screamed that this was wrong, but I thought about the eviction notice. About calling my mother in Brazil and hearing the disappointment in her voice when I told her I'd failed in America. About the $83 in my account. When do I start? The first month was relatively innocent. I cataloged artwork, researched provenance, wrote authentication reports for Mrs. Whitmore's insurance company. The art was real. Rothko's, Basquiat's, Rauschenberg's worth millions. But as I worked, I started noticing things. Pieces with provenance gaps. A Klimt drawing with documentation that ended mysteriously in 1941. An ancient Greek amphora with papers that looked too new. A Benin bronze with no export documentation. I didn't ask questions. I documented what I could, flagged what I couldn't, and deposited my $15,000 cash payment every month with shaking hands. Mrs. Whitmore was always there, watching. She'd sit in her library with her whiskey and her Wall Street Journal, occasionally looking up to observe me work. Sometimes her son would visit. Harrison Whitmore, 42, hedge fund manager, divorced, exactly the kind of entitled rich man I'd learned to avoid. He'd walk through the apartment like he owned it, which technically he didn't yet, making phone calls about the Singapore deal and barely acknowledging my existence. But it was her daughter who made me understand this family's true nature. Victoria Whitmore was 38, a corporate lawyer at one of those white shoe firms where partners make $5 million a year. She visited every Sunday for brunch, and I'd hear their conversations from the library where I worked. Mother, you need to make a decision about the foundation. Not now, Victoria. The board is asking questions. They want to know if you're maintaining Father's commitment to the arts endowment. Tell the board that I'll maintain whatever I choose to maintain. The temperature in those conversations could frost glass. It was during my third month that everything changed. Mrs. Whitmore called me into her private office, a room I'd never been allowed to enter. Inside was a climate-controlled vault, the door already open. I need you to authenticate something, she said. On a velvet-covered table sat a small painting, maybe 12 by 16 inches, oil on wood panel. Even from across the room, I felt my breath catch. I moved closer. The technique, the craquelure pattern, the pigments. This is a Vermeer, I whispered, allegedly. Mrs. Whitmore, there are only 34 known Vermeer paintings in the world. If this is real... My mind was racing, calculating. This would be worth $200 million minimum. If it's real. I spent 3 weeks analyzing that painting. Used every technique I'd learned, every scholarly resource I had access to. X-radiography analysis from a technician Mrs. Whitmore hired with another NDA. Pigment testing, dendrochronology of the wood panel. It was real. A Vermeer that the art world didn't know existed. Where did your husband get this? I finally asked. Mrs. Whitmore's expression was unreadable. That's not your concern. If this painting has unclear provenance, if it was looted during the war or stolen, are those accusations, Miss Cardoso? The edge in her voice made me take a step back. No. I'm just saying that before this can be authenticated publicly, we need to establish... We are not authenticating it publicly. She closed the vault door with a soft click. You will prepare documentation for my private records only. The painting will remain here, in my possession, and you will never mention its existence to anyone. Are we clear? I should have walked away then. Should have taken my 3 months of salary and disappeared. But she was paying me $15,000 a month, and I'd already sent money home to my mother for her medical bills, and I'd moved into a decent apartment, and I'd convinced myself that I was just doing research, just providing information, not actually doing anything wrong. So I said yes. That's when Harrison started paying attention to me. He showed up one evening when his mother was at some charity gala. I was in the library working on documentation for a Cy Twombly painting when he walked in with a bottle of wine. You're the art girl, he said, like he'd just remembered I existed. I'm Dr. Cardoso, actually. I have a PhD. He laughed. Actually laughed. Right, sorry. Dr. Art Girl. Want some wine? I didn't want his wine, but I'd learned that refusing small requests from wealthy people was a good way to lose your job. He poured 2 glasses and sat across from me, loosening his tie. So what's your story? Brazilian, right? How'd you end up working for my mother? I gave him the sanitized version. Scholarship, graduate school, needed work. And you don't think it's weird? He gestured around the apartment. All this art, all these NDAs, all the secrecy? My heart started pounding. Was this a test? I think your mother values her privacy. My mother values control. He drank his wine in one long swallow. You know what she's really doing, right? With all these authentications? I stayed silent. She's building her own private collection that's completely off the books. No taxes, no scrutiny, no questions about where it came from. My father spent 40 years acquiring art through every gray market channel you can imagine, and now she's sanitizing it piece by piece, using people like you to give it legitimacy. I should get back to work. Relax. He poured himself more wine. I don't care. Actually, I respect the game. My father was a ruthless bastard who built his fortune on the backs of pension funds he destroyed with corporate raids in the 80s. The art collection was just his way of buying respectability. My mother's just finishing what he started. He stood up, straightened his tie. But here's the thing, Dr. Art Girl. When she dies, all of this, he gestured around the apartment, comes to me and Victoria, and we're not nearly as sentimental about it as she is. So if you're smart, you'll think about where your loyalties lie. Because in about 18 months, when the estate settles, you're either going to be a very valuable asset or a very expensive liability. He left me sitting there, heart hammering, finally understanding the game I'd walked into. 4 months into the job, Mrs. Whitmore called me into her office at 11 p.m. on a Thursday. I'd never been summoned that late before. She was at her desk, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked shaken. Sit down, Miss Cardoso. I sat. I'm going to tell you something, and then I'm going to ask you a question, and your answer will determine whether you continue working for me or whether our arrangement ends tonight. My mouth went dry. My husband was not a good man. He was brilliant and charming and ruthless, and he built an empire by destroying companies and lives without a second thought. But he loved art. It was the only thing that ever moved him, the only thing he couldn't dominate or control. He could only appreciate it. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at Central Park. 3 years before he died, he was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. He hid it well, but I knew. And I watched him forget everything. Our children's names, our wedding, the companies he'd built. But he never forgot the art. Even at the end, he could still tell you about every piece in this apartment, where he'd acquired it, what it meant to him. She turned back to me, and her eyes were wet. 2 weeks before he died, he told me something. He'd acquired a painting 30 years ago that was stolen. Not gray market, not questionable provenance, stolen, from a Jewish family during the Holocaust. He'd bought it knowing exactly what it was, because he wanted it and he didn't care. My blood went cold. He told me where he'd hidden the documentation proving it was stolen, and he asked me to make it right, to find the family, to return it. It was the only time in 53 years of marriage that I ever heard him express regret. She pulled out a folder from her desk drawer and slid it across to me. This is the painting. This is the documentation. And this, she pulled out another paper, is the contact information for the heir of the family it was stolen from. A woman named Sarah Rosenberg living in Tel Aviv. She's 87 years old. I opened the folder. Inside was a photograph of a painting I recognized immediately. A Kandinsky. Abstract, explosive with color. Worth at least $40 million. Why are you telling me this? Because I need you to authenticate it, prepare the full provenance documentation including the theft, and help me arrange for its return. That's the right thing to do. Is it? Her voice was sharp. That painting is currently listed as part of my husband's estate. It's being counted in the asset distribution between my children. If I give it away, I'm removing $40 million from their inheritance. Harrison is already drowning in debt from bad investments. Victoria is going through a divorce that's costing her a fortune. They need this money. But it's not your money. It's not your painting. By law, it is. We've owned it for 30 years. The statute of limitations has expired in most jurisdictions. I could keep it, and no one would ever know except you and me. She leaned forward. So here's my question, Miss Cardoso. Do I return it and watch my children blame me for giving away their inheritance? Or do I keep it, sell it quietly through private channels, and ensure my family's financial security? I stared at her, finally understanding that this had never been just a job. She'd hired me because she needed someone to tell her what was right, because wealth and power and 53 years of marriage to a ruthless man had eroded her own moral compass until she genuinely couldn't tell anymore. You already know the answer, I said quietly. Then tell me. You return it. You authenticate it, you document the theft, and you return it to Sarah Rosenberg. Because nothing you give your children that's built on stolen Jewish property is going to bring them happiness. It's going to poison everything they touch. She sat back in her chair and closed her eyes. My children will hate me. Probably. They'll contest it. They'll claim I was mentally unfit, that you manipulated me. Maybe. And you understand that if we do this, you'll be subpoenaed, questioned, possibly sued by my own children for influencing me? Yes. She opened her eyes and looked at me with something that might have been respect. Why would you risk that? You could walk away right now. Take your salary and disappear. Because I spent 3 months authenticating artwork in this apartment, telling myself that I was just doing research, just staying neutral, that what you did with the information wasn't my responsibility. And then I went home every night and couldn't sleep because I knew I was helping you hide stolen art. I can't do it anymore. Mrs. Whitmore stood and poured 2 whiskeys. This time she handed me one. My husband would have destroyed you for saying that. I know. I'm not my husband. She raised her glass. Help me do this right. The next 3 months were the hardest of my life. We quietly authenticated the Kandinsky, traced its provenance from pre-war Munich through the theft, through the black market sale to a Swiss dealer, through its acquisition by Mrs. Whitmore's husband. Every document, every transaction, every hand it passed through. Harrison and Victoria found out what we were doing when Mrs. Whitmore's lawyers amended the estate documents. They lost their minds. Harrison showed up at the apartment screaming about betrayal, about how I'd manipulated his mother, about how he'd sue me into oblivion. Victoria was colder. She simply informed me that I'd made an enemy who had the resources to destroy my career and my life. Mrs. Whitmore stood firm. The painting is being returned. The decision is final. But the real resistance came from unexpected quarters. The board of the Whitmore Foundation, who questioned whether she was mentally competent to give away such a valuable asset. Business partners who had financial interests in maintaining the estate's value. Even some art world figures who privately contacted me to suggest that these restitution cases are more complicated than they appear, and maybe we should reconsider the historical context. The pressure was immense. I started getting phone calls from unlisted numbers, messages left at my apartment, offers to consult on other projects for extraordinary fees if I would just clarify some details about the Kandinsky's authentication. One night I found a note slipped under my door. Think carefully about your testimony. Your family in Brazil could use financial security. I called Mrs. Whitmore at 2 a.m. shaking. They're threatening my family. I know. Harrison hired an investigator. He's trying to dig up anything he can use against you or me. Mrs. Whitmore, I can't. If they hurt my mother, they won't. Her voice was steel. Because tomorrow morning, I'm calling a press conference and announcing the return of the Kandinsky publicly. Once the art world knows, once the story is out there, there's no going back. They'll have no leverage. Your children will never forgive you. Then they won't forgive me. Her voice softened slightly. My husband spent his whole life taking from people and calling it business. I have one chance to give something back. Don't let them frighten you out of doing what's right. The press conference was front-page news. Whitmore heiress returns Nazi-looted art worth $40 million. The art world reacted with shock. Restitutions of this scale were rare, especially voluntary ones. Sarah Rosenberg appeared on video from Tel Aviv, crying as she held a photograph of her grandfather standing in front of the Kandinsky in their Munich home in 1938. "I never thought I'd see it again," she said. "I thought it was lost forever, like everything else." The Whitmore family immediately issued a statement through their lawyers saying that Mrs. Whitmore had acted without consulting them, and they were evaluating their legal options. But something unexpected happened. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive. Major Jewish organizations praised the return. Art world ethicists held it up as a model. Museums that had been dodging restitution cases for years suddenly faced renewed pressure to examine their own collections. Mrs. Whitmore became, overnight, a symbol of moral courage in the art world, and Harrison and Victoria realized that publicly attacking their mother for returning Nazi-looted art would destroy them. They backed down. 3 weeks after the press conference, Mrs. Whitmore asked me to come to the apartment one final time. I expected her to end our arrangement. Instead, she led me to her private office and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I want to show you something." She pulled out that leather briefcase, the one that's currently sitting on the bathroom counter, and opened it. It was full of cash, neat stacks of $100 bills. "This is $2.3 million, she said calmly. "It's yours if you want it." My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. "I don't understand." After we returned the Kandinsky, I had my lawyers review the entire collection. Do you know how many other pieces we found with questionable or stolen provenance? I shook my head. 17. 17 paintings and sculptures worth a combined $180 million that my husband acquired knowing they were stolen, looted, or illegally exported. Some from World War II, some from colonial-era theft. Some from ransacked temples and archaeological sites. She closed the briefcase. "I want to return all of them. I want to establish a restitution fund to help other families recover looted art. I want to spend the rest of my life undoing what my husband did. But my children will fight me. They'll claim I'm incompetent. They'll tie up everything in legal battles that could last years." She slid the briefcase across the desk. "So here's my offer. You take this money and disappear. Go back to Brazil. Start over. Never speak about what you saw in this apartment. I'll find another way to handle the restitutions quietly, without publicity, without you being caught in the crossfire. You'll be safe, your family will be safe, and you'll never have to worry about money again." I stared at that briefcase. 2.3 million. Enough to change my life, my mother's life, to never worry about rent or medical bills or any of the crushing weight of poverty again. And if I don't take it, then I'm asking you to stay, to help me authenticate every piece, to testify if my children challenge me in court, to stand with me when the art world and my own family try to stop us. You'll be dragged through lawsuits and investigations and threats. You'll have to be willing to sacrifice your privacy, maybe your career, possibly your safety. She leaned forward. "I'm giving you a choice, Miss Cardoso. Take the money and walk away with your life intact. Or stay and help me do something that actually matters, knowing it could cost you everything." That's when I got up and walked to this bathroom. That's why I'm standing here staring at my reflection, with $2.3 million in cash beside me. And here's what makes this impossible. I want that money. God, I want it. I think about my mother's medical bills, about the apartment in São Paulo I could buy her, about never having to choose between eating and paying rent again, about security and freedom and all the things money can buy. But I also keep seeing Sarah Rosenberg's face on that video call, crying over a painting that represented everything her family lost. I keep thinking about the 16 other families who might have the same moment if we return those pieces. I keep hearing Mrs. Whitmore's voice when she said, "Help me do something that actually matters." And I realize that the hardest part isn't choosing between right and wrong. The hardest part is choosing between right and easy, when easy is worth $2.3 million and would solve every problem in my life. I look at myself in this gold-framed mirror, in this marble bathroom, in this $47 million penthouse, and I ask myself, who do I want to be? The woman who took the money and walked away, or the woman who stayed and helped return what was stolen, even if it cost her everything? My hands stop shaking. I pick up the briefcase and walk back to Mrs. Whitmore's office. She looks up, her face carefully neutral. I set the briefcase on her desk and close it. "I need you to put this in your safe," I say quietly, "because we have 16 more paintings to authenticate, and I need to know that money isn't sitting there tempting me while we do it." Something flashes across her face, Relief, maybe, or respect. You're certain? No, but I'm choosing to be. She stands and extends her hand. When I shake it, her grip is firm. Thank you, Miss Cardoso. Thank you for giving me the choice. That was 4 months ago. Since then, we've authenticated and returned 9 pieces, a Klimt to an Austrian family, 2 African sculptures to a museum in Benin City, a Mesopotamian relief to the Iraqi government, a Modigliani to the heirs of a Parisian Jewish dealer, a Tang Dynasty sculpture to China, 4 pre-Columbian artifacts to Mexico. Harrison and Victoria are suing. The case is ugly and public and everything Mrs. Whitmore predicted it would be. I've been deposed 3 times. I've been investigated by both sides' lawyers. I've had articles written about me questioning my credentials, my motives, my ethics. My former classmates at Columbia avoid me at academic conferences. Job offers have evaporated. I'm living off Mrs. Whitmore's salary and nothing else, knowing that when this is over, I might be unemployable in the art world. But something else has happened too. Families have started reaching out. People who lost art in the Holocaust, during colonial occupation, in the chaos of war. They've heard what we're doing and they're asking for help finding pieces that were stolen from them. Mrs. Whitmore and I spend our days now tracing provenance, connecting families with the art they thought they'd lost forever. The work is exhausting and heartbreaking and sometimes feels impossible. But last week, we returned a small Matisse sketch to a woman in Paris. It had belonged to her grandmother, sold under duress in 1942 to pay for fake papers that saved the family from deportation. The woman stood in Mrs. Whitmore's apartment, holding that sketch, and said, "Thank you for remembering that these aren't just valuable objects, they're pieces of people's lives." That night, Mrs. Whitmore and I sat in her library, drinking the good whiskey. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Not taking the money?" I thought about that briefcase. About the $2.3 million that could have changed everything. About the security and freedom and ease I'd walked away from. "Every single day," I said honestly. "But I'd make the same choice again." She smiled. A real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "Good. Because I'm planning to establish a foundation for provenance research and restitution. I want you to run it. The salary is $200,000 a year, and the budget is $10 million annually. Will you do it?" I set down my whiskey glass with a shaking hand. "Mrs. Whitmore, don't answer now. Think about it. But I should tell you, that $2.3 million I offered you, it's still in my safe. And if you agree to run the foundation, it's your signing bonus. Because you earned it, not by taking it and disappearing, but by staying when you had every reason to run. I start the job next month. The foundation already has 15 cases we're investigating. Mrs. Whitmore's children are still suing, but the public pressure and media attention have made their case harder to win. More importantly, other collectors are starting to come forward voluntarily, prompted by our work, beginning to examine their own collections. Last week, I finally called my mother and told her everything. I wired her money for a better apartment and to pay off her medical bills. I'm flying to Brazil next month to see her for the first time in 4 years. My mother asked me on the phone, "But Querida, weren't you afraid? Turning down all that money, risking everything?" "Terrified," I told her, "every single day." "Then why did you do it?" I thought about Sarah Rosenberg crying over her grandfather's painting, about the Parisian woman holding her grandmother's Matisse, about Mrs. Whitmore asking me to help her undo the damage her husband had done, about standing in that marble bathroom, staring at $2.3 million and realizing that the person I wanted to be wasn't the one who could be bought. Because I realized something, poverty taught me what it feels like to be powerless. But wealth showed me what it looks like when people have power and use it to take from others. And I decided I'd rather be someone who gives things back, even when it costs me, than someone who takes them, even when it profits me. There was a long silence on the phone. Then my mother said, "Your father would be so proud of you." And maybe that's worth more than $2.3 million. Maybe it's worth everything. Because at the end of the day, we don't get to choose whether we're rich or poor, powerful or powerless. But we do get to choose what we do with whatever power we have, however small it might be. We get to choose whether we use our skills and knowledge to help people hide what they've stolen or to help them return what was taken. I chose to help return it. And every time I see a family reunited with their stolen art, every time I watch someone cry over a piece of their history they thought was lost forever, I know I made the right choice, even if it terrified me. Especially because it terrified me. Because the best things we do, the things that actually matter, are usually the ones that scare us the most.